What's up, guys? Welcome back to Katson's Corner, here to talk about another week of college football, another good week of action in the books, another week coming up here. Chargers went on a couple more visits as they've been doing all season. We're going to talk about those. Going to be a little bit of a quicker episode because they were only at two games. We're just going to focus on those two that they went to this week. No special episode shenanigans or anything like that this week. Before we get to all that, make sure you guys do all the YouTube stuff, do all the social stuff. You guys know the drill at this point. Follow the YouTube channel, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure that you have the notification bell on. Do all the stuff there. Make sure you're getting notifications every time that me, Alex, Arjun, Steven, Tyler, all those guys go live and are doing their things. Make sure you guys go watch Steven and Tyler over on the Chargers channel. All that stuff. You guys know the drill. If you like me in particular, you can follow me at Alex Katson, same way you see it spelled on the screen there. I'm on Twitter doing stuff for Chargers Wire, doing stuff for the draft, doing stuff kind of all over the place. I am everywhere, especially this time of year, just kind of trying to keep my life under control, do as much as I can to get some good content out to you guys. So check it out. If you like it, stick around. Like I said, we're going to talk about two games that the Chargers went to this week. A little bit of a lighter week for them. I don't actually think that I have an update slide on here, but that's fine. Yeah, I don't. Okay. So Chargers went to two games this week. First one was Michigan versus Penn State. If you guys have been watching this series all year, you guys know that the Chargers love Penn State this season. This is the sixth Penn State game that they've gone to out of 10. So they are very interested in whatever is happening over there in State College. There are a couple players that we've talked about at length before on this show that I think that they're probably going there to get repeat viewings of over and over and over and over and over again. You can check some of the past episodes to see us talk about some of those guys. Corner Kalen King, Edge Chop Robinson, who are both going to be first round picks in April. We're going to talk about someone else today just because I've talked about those guys enough. You guys kind of know the deal with those guys. And if you don't, like I said, you can go back and watch those episodes and you can learn the deal with them. Michigan, I believe it's the first time that they've gone and visited this season, so a little bit of new blood there. And then the other game that they were at was Oregon USC. It's the second time that they've been to Oregon this season, but the first time that they've seen a USC game. So we'll talk about those guys over in the Pac-12 as well. They were on hand for that. Not as close as it looked game between Oregon and USC to kind of like finally put the nail in the coffin of USC's season if it wasn't already. But lots of good prospects to check out from all four of those schools. So we're going to go ahead and get into it. Starting, of course, with LA's favorite, the Penn State Nittany Lions. We're going to talk about the edge on the other side of the field from Chop Robinson, and that is Adisa Isaac. This is a guy who's going to be late day 2, early day 3, probably. So, like, you're looking at like probably into the third round. Maybe those like compensatory picks in the third round, maybe slips to day 3, ends up being like a fourth round pick somewhere in there. But someone who's going to be relevant in the draft for sure. Someone who I think that the Chargers could target purely just based on that kind of like value addition there. As we've seen over the course of the season, we went into the year thinking the edge was going to be a huge need. Obviously, you look at the contracts on the books and everything before Thule breaks out, and you kind of look and you kind of say like, okay, one of Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack has to be off the team next year. How is that going to work? Like, obviously, we just drafted this kid in the second round, but like, we don't really know what he's going to be yet. And so, like, you kind of need to start planning for the future of that room. And so far this season, all three of those guys have been excellent. And so now, there's a lot more conversation about like, hey, like, is there a way that we can kind of move some money around and make sure that both Bosa and Mac can come back next year and still be on this team? Obviously, with the way that some other things have broken around the team, some needs have gotten larger than we thought they were going to be. Center is a much bigger need than we thought it was going to be at the beginning of the season with Corey Linsley going down and his kind of future status in question. Running back has been kind of a huge need with the way that Austin Eckler has been playing and that whole contract situation. Tight end is a huge need with the way that those guys have been playing. And so, like, things have kind of gotten mixed around a little bit here. And so instead of looking at like a first or second round edge, probably looking at more of like a third, fourth, fifth round pick edge to kind of fill out the depth of that room instead of like someone that's going to step in and be a rotational guy / starter down the line. One which is where I think Isaac comes in. Because like I said, he's going to be like in that late day 2, early day 3 range. He did miss 2021 with a ruptured Achilles tendon, so there are going to be some medicals to check out a little bit, I guess. There, um, Achilles is one of those injuries that takes forever to come back from most of the time, unless your name is Aaron Rodgers, apparently. And so missed the entire 2021 season. Played in 2022, wasn't great, wasn't anything special or anything. Gave a couple interviews where he said like, yeah, I really didn't feel right until like fall camp this year, going into 2023. Has been a little bit better this year than he was last year. But he's your typical Penn State edge. If you think about like the guys that they've put in the league over the last couple of years, like Odafe Owe, that sort of like super like hyper athletic guy, a little bit lighter, can kind of like move around, do a whole bunch of stuff. That's more like what we're talking about with Isaac. He's not like a huge dude or anything. In fact, he's a little bit light for an edge. Um, does lack a little bit of pop in his hands, not like a super powerful guy, again, just because he is a little bit smaller. But has a super high motor, which kind of makes up for that lack of pop. So like he's not going to be able to bull rush you or anything. But if the play starts to break down, quarterback scrambling around and everything, he's able to disengage from those blocks and really gets after the quarterback, gets after who's ever making that reception, makes plays down the field, which is something that you love to see with these kind of like twitchier guys. Due to his stature, he does need some work as a run defender. You hate to double count things against a prospect. Of course, like we've already said, like he's not the biggest guy. He doesn't have a lot of power. He's going to struggle in run defense. And so like, how do you like say both of those things without counting it twice against him, right? But it's just like it is the fact of the matter. He's going to need some work as a run defender because he's just not very big. So if you think about like the way that the Chargers edge room is constructed right now, you have Chris Rumpf as edge 4, who just broke his foot and is going to be out for the rest of the season. That experiment has not really worked out for the Chargers after taking him in, I think it was the 5th or 6th round a couple of years ago. And so if you're kind of looking at the edge room as like we're more trying to replace Chris Rumpf than we're trying to replace Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack, then maybe you take a guy like this who's super twitched up and has this athleticism, but is going to need some work as a run defender, is a little bit of a lighter player, is going to be more of like a designated pass rusher to begin with, and probably for a couple years here. And so maybe that's something that the Chargers are not super concerned with when it comes to Isaac's projection because of where they're going to be able to get him in the draft. And then the other thing with him is he does benefit from wide alignments pretty often. Penn State sends him out like to like a wide 9. What I mean by that is he is way off the edge of the outside shoulder of an offensive tackle a lot of the time, which kind of gives him clearer lanes, kind of gives him an opportunity to do more of like a track sprint rather than having to do any sort of like pass rush moves in order to get home to the quarterback. He can kind of just run past guys, which works out really well for him because he's a great athlete. But it is going to be something where like you want to get him probably into a one-on-one setting. He's a 5th-year senior, so I wonder if he'll be at one of these all-star games. You kind of want to get him into a one-on-one setting and see him be a little bit more consistent with like being able to win with pass rush moves rather than just being like, I'm a better athlete than you. But someone to keep an eye on for sure. Like I said, I think kind of in that middle round range, someone that the Chargers could be interested in, especially with as much interest as they've shown in Penn State this year. Moving on to the other side here, we've got Michigan. Running back Donovan Edwards is a guy that I really like as a fit for the Chargers on offense, because he is, I won't say reminiscent, but I do think that he has a very similar skill set to what Austin Eckler brings to the Chargers as kind of like your do-it-all running back / receiver / pass blocking extraordinaire player. He's another guy that's going to be in kind of like that late day 2, early day 3 range. So again, kind of like that 3rd, 4th round-ish. He's had some terrible touchdown luck this season. I think he only has 1 all year, maybe 2, maybe he's up to 2 now. But basically the way that Michigan's offense has worked this year is that Donovan Edwards gets them down the field, gets them down in like inside the 5, inside the 10, and then they just hand it off to Blake Corum 3 times, and Corum gets in the end zone, and Corum leads the NCAA in touchdowns because he's got like 18. That's not really a knock on Edwards. It's just kind of like the way that the rotation has worked out. Edwards is capable of handling that kind of like goal line back duties. He's done it before, but he also has Blake Corum on his team with him, and so it's not something that he's going to be doing super often at Michigan. But he is a 3-down back. He's got receiving and pass blocking ability. I really like him as a receiver. He's been very productive as one for Michigan this season, and also his whole entire career. One of the better pass blocking running backs in this class, I think. And so Michigan really is able to mix up their looks when they bring him in for passing downs, because you have to account for him going out and running a route, but also if he stays in, then he's a more than adequate blocker and blitz pickup and everything like that. As a runner, he does have very good vision for a college back, in my opinion. Finds cutback lanes pretty frequently. Is someone who has struggled with his efficiency this season. It's way down compared to last year. Just really not getting as many of those explosive plays as he had last season. Did have a knee injury towards the middle of the year last year. He was kind of playing on it hurt last season. Corum was as well, but Edwards was kind of earlier in the year last year. This year really just hasn't hit any of those home runs. His efficiency is way, way down. I think he averaged like 7 yards a carry last year, and he's down into like the threes this year, which for for an NFL back is not terrible, but for a college back that plays at like such a top program, like 3 yards a carry is really bad. Part of that has to do with Michigan's offensive line has just not played very well this season. But part of it is definitely a question that he's going to have to answer, and kind of like show that that's not the player that he is now. Not a lot of tread on his tires, just because he's kind of been in a committee all his entire life at Michigan with Corum, and so not someone where it's like he's breaking down and his efficiency is declining because he's just like out of juice. But it's just been kind of like a weird year for him. And then the other thing too is he's only got adequate speed. I don't think he's going to run away from guys and like pull away from defenders in the league. But he does have enough juice to make some of those explosive plays happen when they're open for him. Just not someone that's going to like kind of create those out of thin air a lot of the time. And so again, talking about like his explosive plays are way down this season. A lot of that can again be traced back to the decline in offensive line play this year. But again, it's kind of like it's a complicated thing to evaluate with running backs. But that kind of like adequate speed and like really only hitting explosives like when they're blocked for them and when they're open, like again, sounds very similar to a certain Chargers running back that we know who's a free agent after this year. And so I think someone to keep an eye on is kind of like a one-to-one replacement, not necessarily super similar players, but just like similar skill sets, even if they utilize them in different ways. Moving on to the Pac-12 game that the Chargers visited this week, we've got Oregon's Brandon Dorlus. He's listed as interior defensive line here. He kind of moves around, does a whole bunch of stuff for Oregon's defensive line. Guy I really liked last year, was really pushing for the Chargers to draft him last season before he decided to come back for a fifth year. Oregon, has really been building something the last couple of years. A lot of those guys that were kind of like on the fence about declaring last year ended up coming back. So far, it's looked like it's worked out. Oregon, obviously number 6 team in the country. They've had a fantastic season. They've only dropped the one game to Washington. And so it's kind of worked out for them in terms of that. In terms of the draft, we'll have to wait and see. Dorlus's feedback is all over the place. I've seen anywhere from the 2nd round to the 5th round. Most of those higher grades are from the media. Most of those lower grades are from the league. It's one of those that's like a little bit difficult to parse. But he has been a very consistent producer the entire time he's been on the field for Oregon. He's a 3-down defensive lineman. He can defend the run. He can rush the passer. That is what the Chargers need on the defensive line. They need a guy that can play all 3 downs. They don't really have one right now. Sebastian Joseph Day is kind of that guy, but not really. Austin Johnson is really only useful on rundowns, and even then this season he hasn't really been super useful on rundowns. Morgan Fox is really more of a pass rushing defensive tackle than defensive end, defensive tackle, however you want to classify it. Isn't really on the field for rundowns, and so they need a 3-down lineman that can stay in on those packages, do all the stuff that they need him to do. Dorlus is a guy that can do that. I kind of look at him as like a consolation prize, quote unquote, if you can't get Johnny Newton in the 1st round. If you want a little bit cheaper, a little bit more of a value option, you can like slide down the board and go for Dorlus. Super versatile guy. He can play anywhere from 3 technique out. So 3 technique is a guy that's lined up pretty much over the guard. Can also play 4-eye, which is like right in between the guard and the tackle ish, kind of like right on the outside shoulder of the guard. 5 tech in between the guard and tackle. Has kicked out to edge for Oregon before. I don't know that he's going to do that a ton in the league. Kind of just like a weird body type. You can see there he's kind of got like a tweener thin going on. He's only 290 pounds. And so do you ask him to slim down and play on the edge full time? Do you ask him to bulk up, which it doesn't really look like he can do very much more of, and play on the interior? Like, how do you use this guy? What do you do with him? Um, a lot of those guys end up being very landing spot dependent. And so we talked about at the top of this, right, how most of the higher grades that I've seen on Dorlus have been from the media, and that includes me. I'm a guy that's pretty high on him as a player, but the league is a lot lower on him. The league kind of sees him as like a early to mid day three player. They're not really sure, like, what are we going to do with this guy? So many of those guys are dependent on landing spot. We've seen in the past was kind of these tweener players. Like so much of it depends on like where you go and how that team uses you. We've seen that with like guys kind of on like towards the back end, like Isaiah Simmons, who went to Arizona and kind of got like jerked around doing all this different stuff, and it just like never really clicked for him. Now he's on the Giants and still kind of like a work in progress. Um, the media does tend to be a lot higher on those guys just because like we watch them and we go, well, this is a good football player. Surely you should just be able to figure out a way to use him. And it's very tempting to get into that thought process, right? It's very tempting to say like, well, like he's good. An NFL team should just be able to figure out how to use him because we know that he's good. But from an NFL team perspective, from an evaluation perspective, teams usually want a player where they know this is the spot that he's going to play, and if we can move him around and have him do a little bit more stuff, that's awesome, and we'll do that, and that's cool. But if he doesn't have a full-time home in the NFL, he's going to have to find one. And are we going to be the team that's willing to do all that extra legwork to find him a full-time spot, to find him a full-time home, to get him reps at all of these different places, to help him find that spot? And a lot of teams are just simply not willing to do that. I do think that the Chargers are in kind of a unique position to be able to do it with the way that their defensive line is currently constructed, where they have all of these kind of designer packages because they have these three really high caliber edge rushers and they have Morgan Fox to kind of do all this stuff. I do think that they're in a position where they could be a little bit more open to that, but it's going to depend on um, whoever is making that pick feels about doing all of that extra legwork once he gets into the actual building and saying like, we have to find you a spot so that you know that you are playing on these downs, and then once you're good at that, then we'll start to move you around and have you do some of the cooler stuff, have you move around, do all this extra stuff. And so that's why a lot of those times, like, guys like this are a little bit higher ranked in the media than they are by the league. Sometimes the media is right about it, and it's just like, well, this guy's good at football, you should have just picked him higher. And sometimes the league is right because they're like, well, actually, this guy doesn't have a position that he plays in the NFL. And so, not picking one side over the other, just trying to give you guys a little bit of context there as to why that sort of stuff happens. Moving on over to USC here. We're going to talk about wide receiver Brenden Rice. He's a Colorado transfer, spent, I think, 2, maybe 3 years there. And also, you might recognize his last name and his position, and that is because he is the son of Jerry Rice, the greatest wide receiver of all time. So that's a little fun thing. Does have mid-round feedback. I think he's going to be kind of like second, third, fourth-ish range, like maybe sneaks into the late second, probably is going to be like a third round pick, maybe slips all the way down to the fourth. He's 6'3", 210, but for a guy that size, which is, a bigger receiver, does have some nice burst off the line, has some nice suddenness to his routes. You can tell that he's been getting coached how to play wide receiver since he was probably able to walk because his dad is Jerry Rice. And so, he does a lot of things that are a little bit more advanced for a college player, has a lot of tempo stuff with his route running that's just like super advanced once he actually gets out into a pattern. Um, Due to his size, he does have that kinda like 50-50 ball ability, but he also has like a great yak skill set. USC does a great job getting him out in space to kinda like give him some space after the catch. Part of that too is just kinda like the backyard football style that they kind of play on offense where like Rice and Caleb Williams are just kinda like running around downfield, and then eventually like Caleb just kind of uncorks one, and Rice is eventually, you know, separated a little bit and then has green grass to run with once he gets the ball in his hands. Um, Despite being 210 pounds, he is built kind of slender. He's built kind of slim. A lot of times that does hurt him, like playing through contact. So, like if you get up on the line and you press him, you can get him off of his cadence. You can get him off of his timing. Um, doesn't really affect him as much in the air, the way that it does like Quentin Johnston, like we talked about leading up to this draft. Doesn't really affect him in that way, but it's more just kind of like a physicality at the line sort of problem. And then again, one of the things that I do have an issue with him at the line is he does a little bit too much dancing. What I mean by that is that like his releases just take a long time. A lot of times, he's trying to like chain too many moves together and like basically like he's trying to highlight reel a DB on every play. He's trying to like put a guy on skates and like really break his ankles and then like kind of get a free release to go run the rest of his route instead of just like going out there and running the route. And it's frustrating to see that from a player of his caliber because like if he just got out there and run the route, he would still get open because he's a great route runner. He's a very advanced route runner. He's got a great understanding of tempo. He's a great sideline guy. He has all of these other skill sets where it's like you don't need to do that. And so I think just kind of coaching some of that complexity out of him and just saying like, hey man, like just keep it simple at the line, get out and run the route, and just trust the fact that like you will get open and you will, you can put a guy on skates 5, 7, 10 yards down the field. You don't have to put him on skates at the line of scrimmage. That is going to be something that I think is going to be a work in progress with him, but he's a great player. I think he's, like I said, he's going to probably be like a second or third round pick. Maybe he slips all the way down to the fourth. We'll have to see how testing goes and everything like that. But someone who I think is interesting at the very least. And, the Chargers does fit the Chargers body type historically, 6'3", 210. So it could be someone that they look into a little bit further down the draft, especially if some of those veterans are off the team because of cap constraints. Moving on to the preview for next week's games. It's a little bit of a lighter slate. A lot of teams have like some tune-up games before rivalry week starts next week. So there's a lot of games that are not so great. Like Florida State is playing North Alabama. Alabama's playing Chattanooga. All those kind of like games like that, where it's just kind of like, why are we doing this in the middle of November? The season was just starting to get good. But there are a couple that I think are worth keeping an eye on, especially for a draft perspective. Starting with North Carolina versus Clemson. North Carolina is still number 24 in the country. Clemson not ranked, but they've had kind of an up and down season, are still capable of beating anyone on their schedule. This is the game to watch if you are looking for linebackers. I know someone in the Guilty as Charged Discord was asking about the linebacker class a couple hours ago as of recording this video, kind of earlier on Monday. This is the game to watch if you want to watch linebackers. North Carolina's got one, Cedric Gray, who I think is going to be in the top 5-ish linebackers drafted, probably like a second or third round player. And then Clemson's got 2, Barrett Carter and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Jeremiah Trotter Sr., who played for the Eagles, obviously. But both those guys are pretty phenomenal athletes, kind of fly all over the field. I think that they're going to be closer to second rounders as well. Not really a first round caliber player in this year's linebacker class, but Carter and Trotter are definitely going to be in that conversation for linebacker 1. Although it could be something a little bit similar to the Clemson guy. Was it last year or 2 years ago? I can't think of his name right now, but Trenton Simpson, who came in kind of as like linebacker 1 and then ended up being like I think he ended up being like a third round pick because he was just a little bit small. Could be another thing like that. So just, watch the game, see how you feel about those guys. Michigan versus Maryland. I don't expect this to be a super close game, but Maryland does have a really nice corner, Jaquan Shepard, who we have not talked about on the show before, but he's a guy that has like second round feedback from some people. Whether or not he's going to be tested very much in this game remains to be seen. Michigan only threw 8 passes against Penn State because the running game was just working. They might just do that again. I'm not really sure. But if they do pass the ball, keep an eye out for Shepard. He's going to be probably on Roman Wilson for most of the game if they have him travel a little bit. Someone that's probably going to end up popping up on the All-Star circuit and stuff. So, might as well learn the name now. On the Michigan end, we've got obviously Donovan Edwards, who we talked about earlier, but also his backfield mate Blake Corum, who's kind of more of like the power running back. Um, does have an injury history that teams will have to parse through. Had that knee injury towards the end of last season. Um, but someone who has been super productive this season, as I touched on earlier, has like I think it's 16 or 18 rushing touchdowns this year, leads the country in rushing touchdowns, has really just been a machine in the red zone. Looking at the Chargers' short yardage problems, especially especially in that Lions game and also just all season, that's a very attractive player to them, I think, at this stage as well. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see them go that direction too. And then on the other end, they've also got an edge rusher, Braden McGregor, who's going to be kind of more of a mid-round player, kind of built the same way as some of those, more recent Michigan edge rushers that have come out, kind of like that Aiden Hutchinson sort of build. Not the same caliber as Hutchinson as a player, but kind of that same sort of build is just like 270, 280 um, power rusher is going to get home with like motor and bull rush and like a lot less finesse. And so if that's more your style, someone to keep an eye on against Maryland, who's got a couple of like okay tackles. Washington versus Oregon State, probably the biggest game of the week. Washington number 5, Oregon State I think is up to number 10. This one's at 12:30, or no, not 12:30, 4:30. It's at 4:30. Washington's running back Dylan Johnson has been on a tear the last couple of weeks. Has really like brought some life to that offense when the passing game has struggled, which it has in the last couple of weeks. Michael Penix was dealing with a nasty like flu that was going around campus for a couple of weeks, so the offense was really struggling. Jalen McMillan has also been injured. There's been a whole bunch of stuff going on with the passing game, but Johnson has really like kept that offense steady with his presence in the run game. Ran for 250 yards against USC. Had another great game against Utah last week. Expect that to keep going, even against a very solid Oregon State run defense. On the other end, Washington's got a edge rusher, Zion Tupuola-Fatui, who, if you've been following the draft for a few years, is probably a name that you recognize. Had a huge season in the COVID year in 2020 as a redshirt sophomore. Was someone that had first round hype going into the 2021 season, has had some injuries since then. I believe it was like an Achilles issue that he had. Really hasn't had like quite the same juice since then. Is still around. He's a 6th-year senior. This is his last year. Has really morphed his game into more of like a savvy, like veteran style edge rusher. Like more like timing his snap counts and like winning less with his athleticism and more with his brain, which I think is a really cool development and speaks well to his longevity in the NFL. I don't necessarily think he's ever going to be like a starting caliber player, but he's definitely going to be a quality rotational guy. And so someone to keep an eye on kind of is like a probably day 3 pick at this point. But we've talked about the Oregon State offensive line before. They've got 2 NFL caliber tackles. So I'm interested to see how he does against them. And then on Oregon State side, we've got a safety, Keaton Oladapo. He is a little bit of a quieter name. I think that he's kind of in the mix for top safety in this draft, but no one has really talked about him a ton that I've seen. Has had a solid season for Oregon State. He's going to be tested a lot with the fireworks that the Washington offense can put up through the air and now also on the ground with Johnson. And so interested to see how he holds up in that big matchup there. Last one here, we've got Florida versus Missouri. Florida's had a weird season. They're not very good, but Missouri is. And so, I think this is still a fun game to watch. If you just are scrolling through channels, I think this one's going to be on. Florida's got an edge rusher, Princely Umanmielen is how you say that. He is probably Florida's best player on defense. I think that he's going to be a 2-3-4 type player. So like anywhere from the second round to the 4th round. Another guy who can kind of fill in as a rotational edge rusher. Has had some weird reps this season, but I think that's more of a coaching point than a him thing. Gonna have to go back to the tape and watch that. Missouri's got a running back, Cody Schrader, who's in his 6th year of college. Fun story. If you don't know it, look it up because we're running out of time here. But cool guy, transferred in from D2 Truman State. Has had a big couple of last weeks. I think he's probably going to end up being a UDFA guy just because of his background. And, he started out at D2 for a reason. Some of those guys end up getting drafted, but I think he'll probably be a UDFA. But as we all know, running backs kind of grow on trees. Chargers got Austin Eckler as a UDFA. no reason that they can't do it again with Schrader. And then Missouri's also got a corner, Ennis Rakestraw Jr. Missed last week due to injury against Tennessee. I think he should be back for this game against Florida. Florida's passing game has low-key been fine with Graham Mertz. And so shutting that aspect of their offense down is going to be a big key for Missouri winning that game. So if Rakestraw does come back and play, keep an eye on him as well. All right. That's going to do it for me this week, guys. I said it was going to be a shorter episode at the top, and I lied. We're still at half an hour because I just love to talk. But I'm going to get out of your hair here. Again, make sure you guys do all the YouTube stuff, do all the social stuff. You guys know the drill with all that. We will be back next week to talk about the week that was in college football, see if the Chargers visit any of these games. And until then, I will see you guys later.